In 1971, I finished my PhD at Johns Hopkins University, studying directionally selective neurons in fish brains. Wanting a break from the long hours of working in a dark laboratory sitting in a Faraday cage, I was delighted to find that at the Hopkins Medical Institutions, Carlton Ray conducted research on marine mammals. I started my postdoc in Carlton's lab in July 1971. Just months earlier, Carlton had become the program director of the Marine Mammal Program of the U.S. International Biological Program. With the assistance of Suzanne Montgomery Contos, he had produced the first issue of the Marine Mammal newsletter. Suzanne went on to a long career working as the special assistant to the executive director of the Marine Mammal Commission. Other members of the executive committee of the Marine Mammal Program included Bill Cheville from Woods Hole and Ken Norris, then at the Oceanic Institute in Hawaii. When Congressman John Dingell asked one of his staff members, Frank Potter, to take the lead in drafting legislation regarding the management of marine mammals, Potter asked Carlton to pull together some colleagues to provide scientific advice on the bill. Carlton asked Ken Norris and Bill Cheville to join this group. Carlton's office at Hopkins in Baltimore became one focus of this effort. As a young postdoc, I contributed nothing, but I learned a great deal as these three eminent marine mammalogists helped to develop the scientific concepts underlying the Marine Mammal Protection Act, or the MMPA. I recall discussions about the importance of focusing on marine mammals as components of their ecosystems, the need to move from an exploitation-based maximum sustainable yield metric to a population-focused metric, which eventually became the optimal sustainable population of the MMPA. And finally, the importance of including the precautionary principle in any legislation, given the great uncertainty with respect to most aspects of marine mammal science. Norris, Cheville, and Ray went on to become the initial members of the Committee of Scientific Advisors of the Marine Mammal Commission, referred to as the CSA. My first direct experience with the MMPA occurred in the mid-1970s when Carlton and I were developing a radio tag to attach to walrus. The permitting process was still at an early stage, in addition to the paperwork all applicants are familiar with. At this point in the process, there was also an open hearing before the agency that would issue the permit, in this case, the Fish and Wildlife Service. I don't think this step of an open hearing lasted very long because that was the only permit I was associated with that included that step of an open hearing. For the next few decades, my interactions with the MMPA were primarily obtaining permits for my research on walrus and whales, seals, and dolphins. I never had occasion to feel that the permitting process inhibited my research efforts, and I felt that the information required was relevant to the MMPA goals of maintaining ecosystems of which marine mammals are a part. In 1998, I became a member of the Committee of Scientific Advisors of the Marine Mammal Commission and served for 18 years on the committee, serving some of that time as chair of the committee. As a member of the CSA, I became much more familiar with all components of the MMPA and the central role of the Commission in providing the independent advice that agencies needed to assure that the requirements of the MMPA in terms of ecosystems, populations, stocks, and the precautionary principle were incorporated in their permits. In general, the permit offices of the National Marine Fisheries Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service were receptive to the comments from the Commission. The effects of stress on marine mammal populations, which has become a major topic in the last decade, was first addressed by the Commission in the late 1990s. The 1997 International Dolphin Conservation Act directed the National Marine Fisheries Service, in consultation with the Marine Mammal Commission and the Inter-American Tropical Tuna Commission, to conduct population assessments and studies on the stress that was induced in dolphins during the purse seining of tuna and the accompanying dolphin encirclement. By that time, the industry was doing a good job in eliminating dolphin deaths with net modifications and a backing down procedure. However, there were concerns that the continued encirclement of dolphins in the tuna capture process was creating stress that inhibited population recovery. When all the data had been accumulated and the stress studies conducted, I was a member of the 2002 Indirect Effects Expert Review Panel to advise the Secretary of Commerce on the dolphin-safe tuna labeling issue. We concluded the stress of repeated encirclement was the most likely reason for the lack of a population rebound in the absence of direct mortality. By the time I became a member of the Committee of Scientific Advisors, the main permitting focus had shifted from the research and display permits of the 1970s to incidental take permits based on the potential harassment of marine mammals. The area that I focused on for most of my 18 years on the CSA was the issue of the effects of noise on marine mammals. As the Commission was among the first to consider the effects of stress on marine mammals, it was also among the first to consider the effects of noise on marine mammals. John Twiss, the executive director of the Commission, first raised this concern in 1990 when he became aware of an experiment to see whether measuring the speed of sound transmission across major ocean basins could be used to track changes in ocean temperature. The sound source was loud and low frequency, and its effect on marine mammals, baleen whales in particular, had not been considered before John began asking questions. About the time I joined the CSA, the focus of concern was more of the sound that was associated with naval operations, low-frequency active sonar and mid-frequency active sonar. The former had been the subject of litigation that led to a consent agreement between the Navy and a coalition of environmental groups. The latter became front-page news in March of 2000, when the naval anti-submarine warfare exercises in the Bahamas were associated with the strandings of 17 cetaceans, including 14 beaked whales. Causal linkages were uncertain. Congress called on the Marine Mammal Commission to fund one or more international conferences to assess acoustic threats to marine mammals and to develop ways to reduce those threats. The Commission created an advisory committee with representation from all constituencies. The hope was that the committee could arrive at a consensus document, but the breadth of perspectives of the participants was too great for that to happen. In the end, different committee members representing different constituencies submitted a total of 7 statements reflecting their assessment of the extent of the problem and the potential next steps. The divergence of opinion emphasized the magnitude of the sound and marine mammals. While these committee deliberations were ongoing, the Commission also held a meeting of scientists to focus specifically on the issue of mid-frequency active sonar and beaked whales. This meeting resulted in a paper published in the Journal of Cetacean Management that all of us who had contributed to the meeting were co-authors on. As the issue of sound in marine mammals became more prominent, the Commission realized that many scientists, as well as the general public, needed a primer on underwater sound. The Commission asked Drs. Bradley and Stern to prepare a booklet on underwater sound and the marine mammal acoustic environment. The Commission also provided support to the National Academy of Sciences for some of the 5 reports they produced on the issue of marine mammals and noise and the potential consequences. I served on 3 of these National Academy committees and chaired one of them. The Commission has also provided support for the creation and dissemination of knowledge about marine mammals. They have created a grant program to support research in critical areas of marine mammal conservation, and they have provided support to consistent support for the biennial meetings of the Society for Marine Mammalogy and the triennial meetings on aquatic noise. These examples, I believe, demonstrate how the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Marine Mammal Commission that it created have been in the forefront of rational management of living marine resources. The MMPA has accomplished all of its original goals to focus on ecosystems of which marine mammals are part, to identify sustainable metrics, to employ the precautionary principle. All of these and so much more. I trust that the public will continue to support the MMPA and the Commission's work over the next 50 years.